Hey, welcome back. About 15 years ago, I was interviewing for one of my first iOS engineer jobs. I thought I was well prepared. I knew all the iOS frameworks, databases, algorithms, all that. Then the interviewer asked me, what is the most important principle of a REST API? I panicked and said something like that it returns data? And that was, of course, a really bad answer. The truth is, the key principle is that REST APIs are stateless. And in this video, I walk you through why that matters and everything else you need to know about designing REST APIs for mobile apps. By the way, if you're preparing for big tech interviews, I run one-to-one mentorship sessions where we can do a mock interview, build a custom prep plan, or practice mobile system design together. Links down below. Let's dive in. So, what exactly does REST mean? REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It's an architectural style, a set of rules for how to model resources and how clients and servers should interact. Important point, REST itself is not a protocol and it is not equal to HTTP. In practice, most REST APIs use HTTP because it maps very well to the constraints. At high level, the main REST constraints are: first, client-server. The idea is that the app and the backend each do their own jobs. The client focuses on presenting data and handling interactions, while the server focuses on storing and serving data. That way, the backend can evolve without forcing a new app release. Second, stateless. Each request from a client must contain all the information the server needs to understand and process it. The server does not keep client session state between requests. But what does this mean for a mobile app? It means you are responsible for managing the user's state. The server won't remember what page you were on or what data you last fetched. This is why we use tokens for authentication in every request, and why your app needs to handle things like pagination and local data caching itself. It makes servers simpler and more scalable, and it forces a clear separation of concerns that actually benefits well-architected mobile apps. Third, cacheable. Responses should indicate whether they can be cached. Good caching reduces latency and saves battery on mobile. Fourth, uniform interface. A consistent way to identify resources, work with them using standard operations, and exchange their data in formats like JSON or XML. This consistency makes REST easy to understand and use from any client. And fifth, a layered system. The backend can include extra layers like gateways, proxies, or caches, and the client doesn't need to know about them. So, when people say RESTful API, they usually mean an API that follows these constraints, often implemented over HTTP using consistent URLs, JSON representations, and standard status codes. Alright, how do you actually design REST API endpoints? Each endpoint corresponds to a resource, like a post or a comment. To make this concrete, we'll use Instagram's newsfeed as an example. First, identify your resources. Resources are basically the things your API exposes. In Instagram's newsfeed, resources are posts, users, comments, likes. Each resource should have its own endpoint like /posts, /users, or /comments. Next, use the right HTTP verbs. REST APIs use HTTP methods to define what action you want to perform on a resource. Get to fetch data. Example, get posts returns the newsfeed posts. Post to create a new resource. Example, post/posts. Put to update resource entirely. Example, put/posts/99 updates post 99 completely. Page, update a resource partially. Example, page post/99 updates just the title of post 99. Delete to remove a resource. Example, delete posts/123 deletes the post 123. Next, endpoint design. Keep URLs intuitive and consistent. Use plural nouns for resources and avoid verbs in the past because verbs are already covered by HTTP methods. For nested resources, like comments on a post in this example, include the parent resource in the pass, like this, /posts/123/comments. This makes relationships clear and avoids ambiguity. Next, parameters. You can pass parameters in two main ways. First, query parameters for filtering, sorting, or pagination. Example, /posts, limit equal to 20 and offset 0. Or you can use pass parameters to specify a particular resource. Example, /posts, /123. Next, HTTP headers. Headers carry metadata about the request or response. Typical ones include authorization header, for example, bearer token to identify the logged-in user. Content type header tells the server what format the client is sending, for example, application/JSON. And the accept header tells the server what response format the client expects, for example, application/JSON or application/XML. Use standard HTTP response codes so clients know what happened. 200 requests succeeded, 201 resource successfully created, 400 bad request, client sent something invalid. Additionally, I would highly suggest to return a consistent JSON body with details the mobile app can use. For example, for a failed signup request, you would return a custom JSON that contains error with code, validation failed, message, the given data was invalid, and additional details such as email and password. This allows the mobile app to parse the error and show specific messages to the user right next to the relevant input field, creating a much better user experience than just a generic alert. Next, data encoding options. You need to decide how to encode your data. You can use JSON, human-readable, widely supported, it is good for mobile apps, and is a default choice. Or XML. It is more verbose, rarely used in modern mobile apps, but can enforce strict schemas. Or you can use Protobuf. It is a binary format, smaller and faster than JSON, great for performance-sensitive apps, but less readable and requires generated code. So JSON is simple, easy to debug, and works perfectly for mobile apps. The fact that it is widely adopted means that we can parse it in the app using standard library functions, without needing third-party dependencies. And Protobuf would be a faster alternative if you need to minimize network traffic and parsing time. For example, apps like WhatsApp and Slack use Protobuf to efficiently encode messages between clients and servers. Alright, we've designed our endpoints, but how does the server know who's making the request? This is where authentication comes in, and for mobile, it has some specifics. The most common method is using JSON Web Tokens, JWTs. Here's the flow. First, the mobile app sends a login request, post/auth/login with a username and password. Second, the server validates the credentials and returns a JWT, the access token, and often a refresh token. Third, the mobile app securely stores these tokens, usually in the keychain on iOS or key store on Android. And fourth, for every subsequent API request, the app includes the access token in the authorization bearer token header. Now, the mobile-specific problem. Access tokens expire for security. This is where the refresh token saves us. Instead of forcing the user to log in again, the app can call a post/auth/refresh endpoint with the refresh token to get a new access token. This happens silently in the background. Why is this so important for mobile apps? It provides a seamless user experience. The app can handle session renewal without annoying the user, even if they've been using the app for weeks. Always design your Auth API with this token refresh flow in mind. Alright, next up, pagination. Pagination is a way to split large sets of data into smaller chunks, called pages. Instead of loading everything at once, a mobile app fetches a limited number of items at a time. For example, 20 posts per request. This improves performance, reduces memory usage, and keeps the app smooth and responsive. There are two common pagination strategies. First, offset-based pagination. With offset-based pagination, the client specifies limit, how many items to fetch, and offset, where to start in the dataset. For example, get/posts, limit 20 and offset 40 fetches 20 posts starting from the 41st item. The backend typically includes metadata about the overall dataset, so the client knows where it is in the full list. Like this: data 20 posts, meta total count 500, limit 20, offset 40. Pros of this approach: works well with stable, fixed-sized datasets, allows jumping to any page or random offset, and is simple and easy to understand. Cons: performance can suffer with very large datasets because the database may need to scan many rows. And another downside is that results can become inconsistent if data changes frequently. Next up, cursor-based pagination uses a cursor, usually an ID or a timestamp of the last item fetched to retrieve the next set of results. Unlike offset-based pagination, it works well with frequently changing datasets, like social media feeds. It can also support going both forward and backward using next cursor and previous cursor. For example, get/posts, limit 20, and cursor ABC. The backend response in this case also includes metadata with the cursor for the next page, like this: data, 20 posts, meta, next cursor, some ID, previous cursor, and limit 20. Pros of this approach: efficient and stable with large or dynamic datasets, flexible page sizes, and it can move forward and backward through the dataset. Cons: slightly more complex to implement, and doesn't allow jumping to any page or random offset. In short, offset-based pagination is great for small or stable datasets and when you need random access to pages. Cursor-based pagination, on the other hand, is better for feeds that update frequently, like social media, because it's more efficient and reliable. Next, caching. Another big part of making mobile API efficient is caching. Caching reduces how often the client has to hit the server and saves battery, bandwidth, and load time. Let's talk about caching strategies. First one is cache control headers. REST APIs use HTTP headers to tell clients how long a response can be reused. For example, when fetching the newsfeed, we can get post response headers cache control max age 60. This means the client can reuse the feed response for 60 seconds without hitting the server again. If a user scrolls away and comes back within that window, the app shows the cached feed instantly. Another example for comments, we get a response headers cache control no cache. Comments change frequently, so the server tells the client it must revalidate before using any cached data. Next strategy is eTag or entity tag. eTags help check if data has changed without downloading it all over again. For example, in the client's first GET request, it receives response headers eTag equals ABC. Next time, the client makes a GET request for the same post with a header if known match ABC, where ABC is the eTag. If that particular post hasn't changed, the server replies with a status code 304 not modified with no body. Then the client reuses its local cached copy. This saves traffic and is especially useful when scrolling through posts you've already seen. Another option is last modified, where the server sends the timestamp of the last update. For example, get post 123 returns header last modified and the timestamp. On the next request, the client includes this header, if modified since, and that timestamp. If no updates happen since then, the server replies with 304 not modified. This is simpler than eTags and works well for data that updates periodically, like a user's profile. Now, let's move on from server-side caching to offline strategies, which are especially important for mobile apps that might have flaky or no internet connection. Here are some common approaches. First, local caching in a database like SQLite or Realm, so data is always available offline. For example, Instagram can show the last downloaded post when you open the app with no signal. Next strategy is called stale while revalidate. The app shows cached data right away, then updates it in the background. For example, you might see yesterday's feed first, and then it refreshes silently once the network responds. Next, queued writes. If a user likes a post or adds a comment offline, the app stores the action locally and syncs it once the device is online. By combining cache control headers, eTags, and local storage, your API becomes faster, saves bandwidth, and ensures your app stays usable even with poor connectivity. Another important thing to consider is API versioning. Mobile apps don't all update at the same time, so your backend might need to support multiple app versions simultaneously. Without versioning, a new change in the API could break older apps that haven't updated yet. A common approach is to include the version in the URL, like this: get/v1/posts or get/v2 posts. Here, v1 might be the older version for apps that haven't updated, while v2 includes new fields or features. Here's how I usually handle multiple mobile versions. First, only remove old API versions after most users have updated. Second, keep changes backward compatible whenever possible. Adding new fields is usually safe, removing or renaming them is not. And third, clearly document version differences so mobile developers know which endpoints and fields to use. With proper versioning, you can keep your API evolving without breaking existing apps, making it easier to roll out new features while supporting users on older versions. One last tip: documenting your API is crucial, and OpenAPI is a standard way to do it. It describes your endpoints, parameters, request and response formats, and authentication. Basically everything a mobile developer needs to integrate with your API. With an OpenAPI spec, you can even generate client code automatically, create interactive docs. It saves time, reduces bugs, and keeps the integration consistent across iOS and Android clients. Alright, if you take one thing from this video, remember, REST APIs are stateless, and don't make the same mistake I did in my first interview. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.